Okie dokie, it's 6:01, so we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining. Looks like we've got 56 people in. I want to thank the Sustainable Tucson folks for pushing their meeting back a couple days and joining us here tonight. Um, we have, I'm going to go through a couple of ground rules and talk as little as possible because we have some really good speakers lined up. First of all, John Kimek is our Tucson Water Director. He's going to lead it off. Then we have four people from the Department of Defense. I don't know how many are going to participate in terms of the presentation. Cynthia Cash, Shimi Matthew, and Roger McCready are from the Air Force Civil Engineering Center. And then Keith Freuhofer is from the National Guard Bureau. From ADEQ, we have Dr. Matt Narder and the director, Michael Cabrera, is here. And then finally, from the City Attorney's Office, Chris Avery, who is our water attorney. This is a particularly timely meeting because of two things that have happened in the very recent past. Number one is the EPA has lowered the health advisory on PFAS from 70 parts per trillion down to effectively non-detect, 0.0004 parts per trillion. That will impact necessarily how everybody is looking at PFAS contamination. It's still a health advisory, though, unfortunately. It's not a maximum contamination level, and I'm sure Chris Avery will describe the difference because that whether it's an MCL or an advisory determines whether certain processes kick in and certain funding opportunities kick in. So that's one thing that's changed. As all of the, I'm sure everybody on the call realize, we, City of Tucson, well over 90% of our customers are receiving Colorado River water. We're not serving our groundwater. And so the reason that's germane to this conversation is that, and could everyone mute? I'm hearing myself twice. The reason that's germane is because the Bureau of Reclamation, I'm going to go in and mute you if you don't. The Bureau of Reclamation here in the last couple of weeks announced a requirement for the 7 basin states to reduce our allocation off of the Colorado River significantly, 2 to 4 million acre feet. That means that the Colorado River is severely challenged than we had known. Whoever Motorola is, please mute yourself. I'm going to start calling you out. Marilyn Thompson, please mute yourself. Everybody, please mute yourself so we're not hearing this twice. That means that we're going to be reliant on our groundwater much sooner rather than later, much sooner than we had anticipated even a month ago. So the PFAS contamination in our groundwater is an immediate issue. Somebody from my staff go in and mute everybody, please. Mute you. And so that's the reason this conversation is particularly important tonight. So I'm going to first of all kick it off to John Kimek to start off. We will be taking questions out of the chat. So put your questions in the chat. We're going to let all of the participants give their presentation first, and then we'll circle back. And so if you've got questions, go ahead and start putting them in the chat as people are making their presentation. John, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Kozachick, and good evening, everybody. From Tucson here. My name is John Kamik. I'm the director of Tucson Water. So I'm just going to give a little overview, and the council member hit a lot of the points that I wanted to bring up as well before we go to our two presenting groups from ADEQ and Davis-Monthan to talk about the active projects they have in the area related to Davis-Monthan. So first and foremost, like the council member pointed out, Tucson Water has been very proactive for many years, in particular related to PFAS and other emerging contaminants that don't necessarily have any regulatory guidance right now. So we've known about PFAS for a number of years, and our strategy for a long time has been avoidance. Whenever we find PFAS in any of our wells, particularly in the Tucson Basin, we've been proactively turning those wells off for putting them in an emergency status. We've been successfully able to do that for a while now. But PFAS is still a strong concern for us for the reasons the council member pointed out. The vast majority of our water does come from Avra Valley and is moved into the community from Avra Valley into the Tucson area. That's where we store our Colorado River water. So that water is recovered from Avra Valley after it's stored underground. Most of it is wheeled into the community. However, there's certain times of the year where there's not access for those time periods, and the importance of the central Tucson well field and what we're going to be talking about today with the projects related to Davis-Monthan is still very important. That is our historic water supply, the water supply under the urban environment of Tucson. And we may need to go back to that in the future. So from the city standpoint, from the department standpoint, making sure the Tucson aquifer is clean of not only regulated compounds, but clean of emerging contaminants of concern is always a high priority for us, and why these projects that are taking place are so important that they continue. We have created our own guidelines for these compounds that have been in effect for many years, and that's how we know when to take a well out of service or remove a well from any active service. And our guidelines have been very conservative for a number of PFAS, more PFAS compounds than what the EPA currently has health advisories for. So you can take comfort in that in the way we've been proactive. The council member did mention on June 15th, the EPA did change. All right, I was muted. Okay, I'm back now. All right, there we go. So June 15th, the EPA did adjust some health advisories on PFAS compounds. Two of them that had active compounds or active advisories that were in effect since May of 2016. And those are the compounds of PFOA and PFOS. And those are the ones you normally see written about nationally as the ones of highest concern. That have been monitored and researched by the EPA, among others. Those that used to be at 70 part per trillion for both compounds combined, but the EPA recently took that health advisory to what we're calling non-detect, because it's below the laboratory method detection limit that's used for monitoring PFAS. So now they pretty much brought that down to below 2 part per trillion. They have a theoretical number that they publish, but below 2 part per trillion is what the laboratory method can measure to. So we're reacting to that accordingly and making sure that our current water supplies do not have those compounds in any of those levels, as well as we have 5 other compounds that we monitor for as well. To date, we do have 25 wells that are out of service or in a highly restricted use for emergency use only. So we are affected as a water utility through these avoidance mechanisms where contamination has been been found present in our system. Some of the things we're doing, we still maintain our finger on what's happening nationally, but we still do make our own internal compliance targets. What we are doing is we are looking at for some potential funding through the infrastructure Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, also known as the IIJA Act, that was passed in December to help bring back some of those 25 wells that have been impacted a little further out into the system and on the northwest side, as well as some other projects. So we're actively looking to try to return those assets using some federal funding. And hopefully that will start to take shape and come around in the next several months. So again, the Tucson water system is essentially PFAS free for as we know it. And we do a lot of monitoring. We do laboratory analysis in our Tucson water quality lab. We have the EPA approved methods to do that. So a lot of investments been made over the last several years to make sure that we're way ahead of these compounds of emerging concern, like perfluorinated compounds, so they don't become any bigger of a problem than they already are in the region and in the aquifer system. So that's kind of my summary on this. I think it's a good point to bounce it over now to our next speaker, so we can hear about the projects going on in the central Tucson area.
Okay, and this would be Department of Defense then, and just to reiterate, so that the people who are putting questions in the chat, I'm watching them, and once all the presenters are done, then I'll scroll back up and start asking them. So from DOD?
How you doing, sir? Council members, just give me 1 second. I'll share the screen for you guys.
You're okay, thanks.
Okay, everybody see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. I got you. So good evening, council members, ladies and gentlemen. I am Captain Mike Kim again, the 355th Wing Chief of Public Affairs at Davis Mountain Air Force Base. On behalf of Colonel Scott Mills, the 355th Wing Commander, I'd like to thank you for inviting the Air Force representatives from Davis Mountain and the Air Force Civil Engineer Center to participate in this evening forum. The Air Force recognizes PFAS as a national issue that poses a threat to Tucson's drinking water, and we are committed to the continued pursuit of the whole of government response represented by the organizations participating in this evening.
And I'm Angela Walls, the Chief of Public Affairs for the 162nd Wing at the Morris Air National Guard Base located adjacent to the Tucson International Airport. On behalf of Brigadier General Jeffrey Butler, the 162nd Wing Commander, I'd like to thank you for inviting the Air National Guard to provide an update on our response actions as well.
Okay. During the previous forums hosted in February and July of last year, Ms. Matthew from the Air Force Civil Engineer Center, or AFCEC, and my predecessor provided an overview of the factors that helped shape the PFAS and PFOA issue in Tucson and the Air Force's response. We also detailed the work led by AFCEC that has been done so far at Davis Mountain, and provided a general overview of the planned remedial investigation at DM, which began at the end of April 2021. Given the significant time that has passed since the last forum, we will review the information and provide updates on remedial investigation. We've also coordinated briefings for you this evening regarding response activities at Air Force Plant 44 and at Morris National Guard Base.
The Air National Guard's first priority is always protecting human health, and in this situation, also drinking water. Morris Air National Guard Base is following the Federal Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, also known as CERCLA, process to properly investigate and address human health risks that may be associated with PFAS from our mission activities in the past. Last year, we provided you with the status of our PFAS activities to include PFAS, PFOA, drinking water, response actions, and our PFAS investigation. We're looking forward to updating you on our efforts to partner with Tucson Water to connect off-base drinking water wells to municipal water provided by Tucson Water and our PFAS remedial investigation.
This evening, we will hear from two briefers from AFCEC, which is the organization responsible for leading the Air Force's effort to address PFAS and PFOA. Ms. Shimmy Matthew will be our first briefer today. She serves as the chief of the installation support section at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, which is charged with coordinating PFAS, PFOA response on behalf of Davis Mountain, Luke, Nellis, and Creech Air Force Bases, as well as the Nevada Test and Training and Barry M. Goldwater ranges. She will provide an update on response actions at Davis Mountain Air Force Base. Mr. Roger McCreary, who serves as AFCEC's the Restoration Program Manager for Air Force Plant 44, will provide a groundwater treatment and PFAS update for Air Force Plant 44. His office is in Dayton, Ohio, where Air Force plants are managed from.
We'll also hear from Mr. Keith Freihofer from the National Guard Bureau Headquarters, Air National Guard Environmental Division, who will also provide an overview of the Air National Guard's response to PFAS at the Morris Air National Guard Base.
Before speaking to the specifics of completed and planned actions at Davis Mountain, Morrison Air Force Plant 44, I would like to provide Ms. Cynthia Cash from the Air Force Civil Engineer Center to discuss the EPA's recently announced near interim lifetime health advisories. Ms. Cash?
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I apologize for not turning my camera on. My wonderful Air Force laptop is telling me it's being used by other apps. And it just won't turn it on. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this. But I did wanted to take a minute or two, introduce myself. I am Cindy Cash. I am with the Air Force's Emerging Contaminants Team located in San Antonio, Texas. We're also unofficially known as the PFAS team, since about 110% of what we do every day focuses on what's going on across the Air Force with PFAS. So I know that everybody is very aware that the EPA has recently issued both new regional screening levels, also known as RSLs, and new interim and final lifetime health advisories for several PFAS elements. The presentations that you're going to see today, if they address the RSLs, they were prepared before we received guidance from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, OSD, giving us authorization to use the new EPA RSLs. But I want to make sure it's very clear that we do have that authorization from OSD now, and we are starting to move forward in making any changes and adjustments to our programs to start using those values. However, the lifetime health advisories, we are still waiting for direction from OSD on how they want us to proceed. So for now, our instruction throughout the Air Force is that we are still using the final previously issued lifetime health advisories for PFOA and PFAS of 70 parts per trillion, either individually or combined. And any presentation that you see tonight is going to reflect that. As far as we're concerned on this end, it is business as usual, addressing everything relating to that 70 parts per trillion number. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that that's where we're coming from tonight, and see if there's any questions before we proceed.
Now we're going to let everybody finish up and go back to questions.
Very well, thank you. And that's my spiel for the evening. But I will be around through the rest of the evening if there are any questions that any of the other Air Force folks would prefer to throw over to me to try to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Cash. Speaking on behalf of Davis Mountain Air Force Base, I'm joined this evening by several members of the DM team, including Mike Torriello, our Director of Community Partnerships, Mr. Todd Canal, our Base Fire Chief, and Mr. Chris Brewster, our Chief of Environmental Compliance. Before passing the briefing over to Ms. Matthew from AFCEC, I'll begin by providing an overview of the factors that have shaped this issue, as well as the Air Force's response efforts at Davis Mountain. In 1970, the Air Force began using aqueous film forming foam, commonly known as AFFF, to extinguish petroleum fires such as those associated with burning aircraft. AFFF is an extremely efficient extinguishing method for petroleum-based fires and is widely used across the industry, including at commercial airports to protect people and property. It is also known to have contained PFAS and PFOA. In 2009, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued provisional lifetime health advisories for PFAS, PFOA in drinking water. Then, in 2010, AFCEC launched a comprehensive preliminary assessment process to identify Air Force installations with fire training areas, emergency response locations, and aircraft crash sites where AFFF had likely been used. In 2016, the EPA established a lifetime health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA combined in drinking water. That same year, Davis Mountain Air Force Base transitioned from the Air Force's legacy AFFF that I previously mentioned to a new formula that meets both military specification requirements for firefighting and the goals of the EPA stewardship program. It contains no PFAS and only trace amounts of PFOA. The only time our emergency responders would use this firefighting foam is in the event of a real-world aircraft fire. And if it were to be used, we would respond to the discharge as a spill to limit PFAS release into the environment. This firefighting foam is not used at DM for training purposes. In 2017, the Air Force completed enterprise-wide sampling of drinking water to ensure supplies met EPA guidelines. This initial work, coupled with the 2010 preliminary assessment, has resulted in the site inspections that have taken place at installations across the country in recent years, including at DM, and the continued work that is ongoing today. This response from the Air Force, led by AFCEC, is guided by the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, applicable state laws, and the EPA's Lifetime Health Advisory for Drinking Water. The CERCLA process makes certain thorough investigative work is being done and promotes accountability, stakeholder involvement, and long-term protectiveness. The CERCLA cleanup process allows us to evaluate the unacceptable risks to human health and the environment and plan for a range of responses and actions that are prioritized within the Air Force Environmental Program. We are taking a three-step approach to assess and respond to potential PFAS, PFOA drinking water impacts, which are identify, respond, and prevent. As I previously mentioned, the Air Force's service-wide response to PFAS, to include ongoing remedial investigation at Davis-Monthan, is being led by the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. And at this time, Ms. Matthew will provide details on the response actions to date at DM and their planned actions for the future. Ms. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, Captain McGinn. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Thank you. If I do run into issue, which I had earlier with the laptop, if I lose the sound, I will call back into the meeting, or I also have team members who are ready to continue with the slides. But that said, good evening. As Captain McGinn indicated, I'm Shimmy Matthew from the Air Force Civil Engineer Center, and I would like to say thank you for allowing me to speak with you this evening. I see a lot of familiar names in the group because this is my third time providing the update at this public meeting led by Councilman Kozachick, and I appreciate the chance to let everybody know what we are doing at Davis-Monthan. I also have a great team that's supporting us at Davis-Monthan and in the office to make sure the work is done in a timely manner. So with that, first, I would like to provide an overview of what has been accomplished by AFCEC at Davis-Monthan so far. As Cindy Cash mentioned a few minutes earlier, she is one of our experts from the San Antonio office. And the results, the briefing, and the information on these slides are based on the 70 parts per trillion lifetime health advisory from EPA. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. So AFCA concluded its preliminary assessment at Davis-Monthan in September of 2015. And this preliminary assessment, or PA, identified 3 areas of interest for investigation. These 3 areas of interest included the DM fire training area near the southeastern end of Davis-Monthan flight line, a stormwater outfall canal located on the north end of the flight line, and 4 historical crash sites along the length of the flight line where AFFF had been deployed. Slide 6, please. So in August of 2016, we collected 9 on-base water supply well samples and 6 tap water sources, which resulted in no detection of PFAS, PFOA, based on the lifetime health advisory of 70 PPT at that time. From 2017 to 2018, an initial site inspection was conducted, the results of which was, they were released in March of 2019. This inspection involved soil samples and groundwater samples collected from the areas of interest I previously mentioned. 4 of the 68 soil samples taken tested above the EPA's regional screening level of 0.126 parts per million. And none of the groundwater samples tested above the EPA lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for drinking water. As a result of this inspection and the additional data provided by our local and state partners and Tucson Water, 2 additional monitoring wells were installed within the 100-acre wood park near the northwest boundary of the Davis-Monthan base in 2019. Samples taken from these wells were released by AFCEC as an addendum to the site inspection report in June of 2019. PFAS and PFOA combined number were detected at 14,400 parts per trillion at well 002 and 935 parts per trillion at monitoring well 003. but with the concentration decreasing with the depth. Slide number 7, please. In October of 2019, AFCIC initiated a contract for an expanded site inspection to test the private wells located within about 1 mile down gradient of the installation. So in summer of 2020, Davis Mountain and AFCIC identified 14 potential private wells within this area. We made every effort to contact the well owners to inform them about the EPA's lifetime health advisory for PFAS, PFOA, and the fact that we had identified potential PFAS, PFOA sources at Davis Mountain and to request their permission to collect the samples from their wells. We received permission to sample 2 of those 14 wells, and there was no detection for PFAS, PFOA at one of the wells, and the other tested at 16 parts per trillion, which was below the EPA's lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion at that time. 3 of the wells were connected to the city water system. 1 was confirmed not to be a well, and we didn't receive response from the owners of 3 of the wells. And 4 were located in an industrial area and didn't get a response from the owners either. And we found out one of the others, the well didn't exist. We also continued to work with the ADQ, Tucson Water, City of Tucson, and other community partners as we continued to share and learn from each other. So in July of 2020, AFCA completed a project to develop a conceptual site modeling, or CSM modeling, that showed the hydrogeology, the groundwater flow, and the local Tucson area geology. This modeling was presented by AFCA to ADQ, Tucson Water, and City of Tucson. And the information has been a very valuable tool as we all continue to work together to learn more about the PFAS, PFOA in the Tucson area. Slide number 8, please. This got some pretty pictures. Following up on our 2020 efforts to sample private wells down gradient of the installation, and in response to additional sampling data provided by Tucson Water and ADQ, we initiated the next phase of sampling by expanding the original sampling area to close existing data gaps to the west and northwest of the installation. This process included identifying any private wells that existed 2 miles down gradient of the installation, advising the owners of the potential impact of PFAS, PFOA, and also seeking their permission to collect the water from their wells. In August, AFCA began the sampling, receiving permission to test 11 of the 19 wells identified in the area. And the results found no detection about the lifetime health advisory of PFOA, PFAS in any of the wells sampled. Again, that was based on the 70 parts per trillion guidance from EPA. 2 of the wells were found to be connected to city water. 1 was used only for irrigation, and 5 of the well owners didn't respond to the request. Additionally, AFCA continued to consistently meet with our partners at ADQ, EPA Region 9, Tucson Water, and City of Tucson to share the information and develop future response initiative. One of the results of our continued partnership with the ADQ, City of Tucson, and Tucson Water was the approval of a $1.7 million environmental service agreement in October of last year between ADQ and the Air Force to begin operation of a PFAS pilot demonstration treatment plant located immediately north of the base. Data will be shared, and we've been sharing data between ADQ, City of Tucson, and Davis Mountain in order to decide the effectiveness of the treatment process, gather aquifer data that may be useful in the future cleanup efforts, as well as the immediate removal of the contaminants to reduce the impact of PFAS in the local aquifer. The facility began limited operation at the end of December last year and full-time operation in February. I'm sure Matt will be talking about it in more details here soon. Now, the good news is, as of this week, Air Force has approved an additional $1.8 million to add to the ESA for a total of about 3.5 million in support of additional work and to continue the operation of the demonstration facility. That funding was approved early this week. Slide number 9, please. Oh, you're already there, sorry. Slide number 9. In April of 2021, AFCIC began a remedial investigation project at Davis Mountain. The remedial investigation, we call it the RI project, is a required and necessary step in the federal circular process. And it is needed to identify and understand the nature and extent of the PFAS release into the environment. It will provide critical information necessary for deciding what long-term responses are appropriate for the contamination. The investigation included collecting data to characterize the site condition, the nature and extent of the contamination, and assessing any potential risk to human health and the environment. The RI project, like this one, involves various steps, including scoping and coordination with the regulators, developing a scoping document such as a work plan, getting it approved, field sampling, data collection, report preparation, review, and approval of the report. The investigation will include further sampling of surface water, groundwater, sediment, and soil at the areas of interest identified at Davis Mountain during the preliminary assessment, which I previously mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. The sampling will be accomplished through the installation of and development of 24 new monitoring wells, about 30 to 45 surface sampling. These planned activities are being executed across 3 phases so that the data collected during the earlier stages can be used to optimize sampling locations for the future stages. So after these soil and groundwater monitoring locations are identified or established, we will conduct semi-annual and seasonal sampling across the newly installed and the existing well, as well as the stormwater outfall canal. So to this day, or as of last week, we have established 30 surface soil and 15 subsurface sampling locations, 11 monitoring wells in the vicinity of the north and of the basis boundary. And we also conducted 3 semi-annual groundwater sampling events so far. In April, we began the second phase of the RI project, which includes the installation of 8 additional monitoring wells, as well as soil sampling. So the RI report will document the nature and extent of PFAS and make a recommendation for further action for each of the identified areas of interest. However, we will provide sampling data to ADQ throughout this investigation. We are expecting the final approved report to be available in 2024. But like I said, in the meantime, we are sharing the data with ADQ. Our ongoing efforts are not necessarily limited to the RI project or the confines of Davis Mountain Air Force Base Gate. The overall objective of the RI project is to delineate the nature and extent of PFAS in soil, groundwater, surface water, and sediment, both on base and off base as needed. Since we don't currently know the exact extent of the plume or exactly how far off base this investigation might go in what direction, based on the preliminary data that we have and provided by Tucson Water, it's likely that some investigation will occur on the north end of the installation. In summary, the Air Force's response strategy for PFAS PFOA remains focused on 3 lines of effort: protect human health, communication and collaboration, and a whole of government approach to address this national issue. Now, throughout the circular process, we maintain the flexibility to address immediate concern to human health and take action when necessary. This could be in the form of providing bottled water and or treatment system to ensure no one is drinking water above the EPA's lifetime health advisory level for PFAS PFOA. These potential action would be implemented to ensure personnel living and working on Air Force Base installation like DM and in surrounding communities like Tucson are provided alternate sources of safe drinking water while longer-term circular response action are identified and evaluated as potential remedies. With that said, thank you again for allowing me to provide an update on our response actions at Davis Mountain and our partnership with City of Tucson, Tucson Water, and ADQ this evening. Captain McGann, I will return the floor back to you.
Thank you, Shimmy. I appreciate that. The Air Force and Davis Mountain are aligned with the City of Tucson, Tucson Water, and ADEQ in recognizing the need to work together to identify, respond to, and prevent the spread of PFAS in our water. We will continue to work toward that goal. My contact information, as you can see on the slide right here, that of my AFCAT counterparts at the Air Force Installations and Mission Support Center Public Affairs Office is listed here. And information related to the Air Force PFOA and PFAS response at Davis Mountain is available on these websites. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Roger McCready to provide an update on groundwater treatment and PFAS response at Air Force Plant 44. Mr. McCready.
Thank you, Captain McCain. I am Roger McCready, the Remedial Project Manager for Air Force Plant 44. I am located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Next slide, please. So I will provide a very brief history of the environmental work at Air Force Plant 44, a snapshot of the TCE and 1,4-dioxin plumes that the Air Force is responsible for remediating. I'll provide a status of the groundwater treatment system repairs that have been ongoing. And then most importantly, the PFAS work that has been completed at Air Force Plant 44 to date. The illustration here just shows some of the areas of interest of the Tucson International Airport area Superfund site that we are a part of. Next slide, please. The facility, Air Force Plant 44, has always been an industrial manufacturing facility since it was constructed in 1951. And it has never been a typical Air Force base operations that has airfields and flight operations. And that'll come to bear here with respect to PFAS. The Air Force Plant 44 and the Air Force became part of the Tucson International Airport Superfund site in 1982. By 1987, we had a groundwater treatment plant constructed at Air Force Plant 44. And just to make sure everyone understand, that is different than the TART plant that the City of Tucson operates at the north end of town. The groundwater treatment system at Air Force Plant 44 has been in place for 35 years with several upgrades to the treatment technology over the years. In 2008, we added an ozone peroxide advanced high pressure oxidation process, or AOP, was added when it was discovered that 1,4-dioxane was present in the groundwater above US EPA guidelines. Next slide, please. The groundwater treatment system consists of multiple extraction wells distributed across the plume south of Los Reales Road that withdraw impacted groundwater, treat that groundwater, and then re-inject it into the aquifer at multiple injection wells. The combination of extraction and injection wells is designed to optimize the capture of impacted groundwater beneath Air Force Plant 44. This figure shows the 8 miles of pipeline, the 10 extraction wells, and 9 injection wells that are part of this system. Next slide, please. The Air Force samples the groundwater at about 140 some wells on and off the site twice a year to monitor the TCE and 1,4-dioxin plumes south of Los Reales Road. This figure is just one example of the maps that are created to monitor the impact of remediation on the TCE and 1,4-dioxin groundwater plumes. The colored dots are monitoring well locations, and the shaded areas are different concentrations of TCE. The yellow shading shows the extent of groundwater above the TCE drinking water standard of 5 micrograms per liter. The pink and red shaded areas are of higher concentration of TCE that the Air Force is focusing on its efforts to reduce which then will reduce the overall plume leaving the site. Next slide, please. This figure shows the same sampling location as the previous figure with the extent of 1,4-dioxin in groundwater as of fall of 2021. That's above the cleanup level of 0.35 micrograms per liter. The Air Force maintains this kind of information and more in technical reports, decision documents, community meeting minutes that can be viewed and downloaded from the Air Force Civil Engineering Center administrative record. So it's very easy to get a hold of these reports and to read and digest them yourself. And I will show you the website link later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Despite the groundwater treatment system being non-operational since 2019, the TCE and 1,4-dioxin plumes are relatively stable and have been seen only slight increases at some of the monitoring locations. The modified and optimized extraction system that will be operational here hopefully this month will continue to reduce the impacted groundwater leaving Air Force Plant 44. Next slide, please. The 30-year-old treatment system was in need of some major repairs. The system of pipelines, pumps, valves, pressure release valves, and even the 2 high-capacity electric power system distribution lines necessary to power the system had to be replaced. The power line replacements had the most impact on the delays of getting the groundwater treatment system back online. We hope the system will be operational this month, and then hopefully it'll continue to run until we can pull all the plumes back onto Air Force Plant 44. Next slide, please. So now the most important part for this forum is the PFAS studies that we have conducted at Air Force Plant 44. As Shimmy had mentioned, the Air Force follows the CERCLA Superfund process for investigating impacts for aqueous film forming foam, or AFFF, at Air Force installations. Air Force 44 has completed several phases of the CERCLA process. We've completed the preliminary assessment, the site inspection phase, and a site inspection addendum. And now we're ready to begin the remedial investigation phase of CERCLA process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, Air Force Plant 44 is different than other Air Force installation in that it has always been an industrial manufacturing facility. And it's not a base with airfield, flight operations, and fire training areas. Thus, fire training exercises, spray nozzle testing involving AFFF are not known to have occurred and had less opportunities for potentials of AFFF releases at Air Force Plant 44. However, we did look into non-fire training areas for research for the preliminary assessment, which included the fire station on site, AFFF storage areas, emergency response locations, and other locations where the potential for of AFFF to have been used, stored, or potentially released into the environment. So we completed the preliminary assessment in 2018. We identified 3 areas of concern. We conducted the site inspection, which involves the actual collections of soil and groundwater from these 3 areas. And then we did a site inspection addendum, which looked at the off-site drinking water impacts potentially from Air Force Plant 44. We researched drinking water wells downgrading of Air Force Plant 44 using well permit databases, the county assessors, office database, satellite imagery, public water supply distribution information, property and tax records, owner and parcels information to try to identify any potential drinking water wells downgradient of Air Force Plant 44. We discovered 13 potential locations. However, of those 13 locations, we sampled 2 drinking water wells that were actually being used for drinking water. even though one location was on public water supply. One well was an irrigation well, and it was not sampled. 5 locations, the properties were connected to City of Tucson water, and so those weren't sampled. And 2 locations, the well did not exist. And the results and the final report for this offsite drinking water inspection are on the AFCAT administrative record, and there's the website there. It's really easy to use. If you just select Air Force Plant 44 AZ on the left and go to the middle of the screen and hit the search button, you'll get the list of all the documents that we've put out there since the early 80s in chronological order. Next slide, please. Here are the areas where release of AFFF may have occurred, and site inspection results indicate that a remedial investigation is warranted. The fire engine wash area and the fire engine wash outfall are related to the only fire station on site and is related to an area where fire engines containing AFFF were washed down. The outfall is at the end of a stormwater drainage pipe that captured this wash water. Then building 864 is a building that contains a fire suppression system that has used AFFF in the past and is stored in a tank on site. So those are the 2 main areas of Air Force Plant 44 that have PFAS based on the site inspection results, and that we will be carrying further into the remedial investigation. Next slide, please. This is a figure of the fire engine wash area and outfall area. You can't probably read it there, but in the right part of the figure, there's a pink dashed line that goes across the figure and about right in the middle of the figure. That is the drainage culvert that captured water in front of the fire station, which is building 828, and then carried it through this drainage culvert over to the left side of the figure to a outfall where it was put into an unlined ditch. So in site inspection results show that the outfall area has PFAS and PFOA concentrations in groundwater greater than the new EPA regional screening levels. They were even higher than the old ones. And so we have 3 wells there that have groundwater concentration greater than RSLs, and that we will have to look into further in the remedial investigation. Next slide, please. At building 864, the groundwater surrounding building had only 1 estimated value of PFAS, and other results were all non-detect. The soil does contain PFAS above EPA regional screening levels, and this area will be investigated further during the remedial investigation. Next slide, please. So the next step is the phase 1 remedial investigation, where, as Shimi explained, we will do site characterization to delineate the nature and extent of PFAS from these 2 areas, and we will do it on site, and if we have to go off site, we will go off site until we know that we have identified the whole extent of any PFAS contamination. The media that we will investigate includes soil, groundwater, sediment, and surface water. We will use this information to update the conceptual site model, even though, because we've done so much work at Air Force Plant 44 over the years, we understand the hydrogeology of the site quite well. We will collect the appropriate data for use in future human health and ecological risk assessments. And all the work plans that will be prepared to collect all this data will be reviewed and approved by US EPA and ADQ. I was hoping to have the contract awarded to the contractor by the end of June. That has slipped a little bit, but I'm still hopeful that this summer we will see a contract awarded the work for this and start preparing to do the work plans and get in the field to collect more data to determine the extent. So thank you all for allowing me to provide this update on Air Force Plant 44 this evening, and I turn the floor back to you, Captain McCain.
Thank you, Mr. McCready. And moving on now to the Morris Air National Guard Base. For those of you who are unfamiliar with, we're home to the Air National Guard's premier F-16 fighter pilot training unit, the 162nd Wing. It's one of the largest Air National Guard wings in the country, and we reside adjacent to the Tucson International Airport, also sharing use of the runway security and fire control with the airport. Again, General Butler's first priority here is protecting human health and drinking water. Moving on now to Mr. Freihofer with the National Guard Bureau. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, thank you. I am Keith Freihofer with the National Guard Bureau. I'm an Environmental Restoration Program Manager. I sit on Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Next slide, please. So a little background, while I may be located in Maryland, where the Air National Guard centrally manages all environmental restoration cleanup activities, the Arizona Air National Guard 162nd Wing is a proud member of the Tucson community, with Morris Air National Guard Base residing on Tucson International Airport. The Arizona Guardsmen and their families have deep roots in Tucson and share community concerns about PFAS, PFOA impacts, as they are also consumers of Tucson municipal drinking water. The Arizona Air National Guard provides mutual aid firefighting to the airport when requested. And our top priority is to ensure no one is drinking water above the EPA lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS and or PFOA resulting from Air National Guard mission-related activities. As does the Air Force, we follow the circle process and for our cleanup mapping, the Department of Defense and Air Force policy, as well as guidance to address PFAS. The Air National Guard is taking response action for off-base drinking water impacts as a result of the Air National Guard activities where the PFAS, PFOA has exceeded the EPA health advisory in drinking water of 70 parts per trillion. Next slide, please. So here's an outline of our PFAS response actions to date. In May 2016, we completed a preliminary assessment which identified 16 areas where there were suspected AFFF releases. 14 of those areas warranted additional investigation. So in March 2019, we completed a site inspection which investigated those 14 areas that were carried forward from the preliminary assessment. The SI included soil and groundwater sampling. The laboratory results indicated that PFAS, PFOA was detected in groundwater with concentrations ranging from 1.45 parts per trillion to 4,880 parts per trillion. And then in May 2020, the Air National Guard confirmed that PFAS, PFOA exceeded the EPA health advisory in 3 off-base drinking water wells, downgrading of the Morris Air National Guard base. And as a likely contributor to that PFAS, PFOA in those wells, the Air National Guard took immediate response action of providing bottled water to those 3 well owners. To mitigate this, in June 2020, we completed a time-critical removal action to outline response actions for mitigating those wells. And we're actively working with Tucson Water Department to connect 3 wells to municipal water. Subsequently, we learned that one of the wells properties is already connected to municipal water. So at this time, there's just 2 left to be connected. We've performed an engineering evaluation cost analysis document as part of the circle process to evaluate the best drinking water mitigation alternative for those properties, which the result was to connect them to municipal water as expected. And we're completing an action memo this month to document that. The properties are still on bottled water at this time, and we are hoping to have them connected to municipal water within the next month. The Air National Guard continues to work with our community partners to ensure no one is drinking water above the EPA health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS, PFOA, resulting from our mission-related activities. Next slide, please. So the next step of the circle process, I mentioned we did a preliminary assessment and a site inspection. We are now on the remedial investigation phase. It's underway. We awarded the contract in September 2021. The remedial investigation will define the nature and extent of PFAS impact and assess risk to human health and the environment, both on and off base. The fieldwork began in December 2021 with collection of groundwater samples from the existing monitor well network that's already in place from other investigations. Our planned future field work consists of collecting samples of all environmental media, such as groundwater, surface water, soil, and sediment. A draft work plan is being prepared now and will be submitted for regulatory review to both EPA and Arizona DEQ next month. The draft RI report and recommendations is anticipated in 2024, and we expect it to be finalized in 2025. The remedial investigation will lay the groundwork for the next phase of the circle process, which is the feasibility study, and that's to assess the technically viable remedial alternatives to clean up the PFAS. The Air National Guard can perform removal actions at any time during the circle process if there are hazards to human health, hazards or risks to human health. Next slide, please. So we're continuing our partnerships. The Air National Guard participates in the Unified Community Advisory Board, also known as the UCAB, and we host the UCAB hosts quarterly meetings regarding the Tucson International Airport area EPA Superfund site, the Tucson Airport Remediation Project, as was mentioned previously, the TARP, and the City of Tucson's efforts to commitment to provide clean and safe drinking water to the community. The stakeholders work together to participate in the cleanup process. The next UCAB meeting is actually next week on Wednesday. And the Air National Guard also attends quarterly meetings with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, ADEQ, the EPA, and other DoD partners in Arizona to share information and collaborate. The Air National Guard participated in the Air Force Western Restoration Summit last month. And we have ongoing coordination with Arizona DEQ and US EPA Region 9 on a routine basis. Next slide, please. So here's some points of contact. You already met Major Walls. She spoke earlier. And then our Environmental Restoration Division Chief is Miss Elaine McDennick. I believe she attended this meeting last year. And there's myself with my email address and phone number. And then for additional information on the Guard's response to PFAS, there's our National Guard website. And as was mentioned in a previous briefing, the Air National Guard, as part of the circle process, puts all of our final environmental restoration investigation documents on the Air Force's administrative record website. And there's the address for the website is listed there. And one difference to find the Air National Guard documents on there, when you bring up the website, there'll be 3 buttons at the top for Active Air Force, Air National Guard, and the BRAC program. So you click the Air National Guard button at the top of the screen, and then there'll be a list of all the installations that we have in the Air National Guard, and you would scroll down and select Morris, and then you just click the search button, and you'll find a list of many, many documents covering, I don't know, 20 years or so of all the investigations that have been done for environmental restoration on the Morris Air National Guard base. And that concludes my brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fryhofer. This concludes the Air Force and National Guard's planned remarks for this evening. We would like to thank you again for all your time and for your opportunity to highlight the efforts of our respective organizations that will soon to help Tucson's water and help keep it safe. Thank you.
We appreciate it. We're getting lots of questions. We can move on to ADEQ really quickly, and then the city attorney, so we can get to questions.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I really appreciate you having me here tonight.
Tough to hear you, Matt.
Can you hear me now?
Speak up. Let's go. Let's go.
We cannot hear you.
Matt, do you have your headset with you?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
No, we can't hear you. So, Mr. Cabrera, do you have comments you can make while he sorts that out so we can keep moving?
Thank you, council member. I was just here to thank the Air Force and the city for the partnership that we've had on Central Tucson PFAS project, and to reiterate the fact that it is possible to move quickly through investigation to remediation. And so I would just encourage all of us to remember that although the CERCLA process is quite detailed, it does not require us to investigate every single source. It does not require us to complete on-site investigations before we move off-site. We have a groundwater plume that is threatening the city of Tucson Central Wellfield. And I would just like to reiterate that speed is of the essence. In our team, Matt Narder and Paula demonstrated with Tucson Water's help and the financial support of the Air Force that it can be done quickly. In less than a year, we completed a remedial investigation of the offsite plume. We designed a pilot demonstration project, constructed it, and now have been operating for several days, which Matt will walk us through.
Misael, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Matt. Yes.
Okay. I really apologize to everybody for that mishap there. Hopefully I can just kind of go really quickly here.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
We left a few minutes. Yep, I will be very quick. Are you still seeing my screen here?
Yes, we can see your
okay,
screen.
Great. Thank you. Make sure I can move it. All right, great. Yeah, so again, thank you so much for having me here. I apologize for that little mishap. I'm going to share real quickly here some of the progress that we've been making on the Central Tucson PFAS project down here in Tucson. This is a map just to get started and get everyone on the same page. Our Central Tucson PFAS project is here in red. I just want to note that PFAS have not been detected everywhere in the red square there. That's really just there to show our general area. And then I also have on the map Tucson International Airport area. That you just heard some of that with Air Force Plan 44 talk and Air National Guard. That I just wanted to point out that's separate sites and show them on the same map here, so we can be clear. I'll be talking here about what's happening north of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. So the planning started for this project back in the summer of 2020, so about 2 years ago now. And it started in response to several Tucson water wells in the area that were having to be shut down because of PFAS contamination. The project was started with the goal of working quickly to prevent any additional PFAS impacts to Tucson Water's central well field. We had three primary elements to the project. The first was really just to get our arms around the problem, to figure out what the extent was. We knew we had an issue from the initial wells that were sampled, but we really needed to know how big of an issue it was. And then gathering that data would also allow us to start designing a remedy, to start taking action here. And then the final element, which really runs through the whole project, is deploying rigorous quality assurance and quality control measures to ensure the accuracy of our data. It's especially important on a project like this, where we're talking about really small concentrations in the part per trillion range. And we want to work quickly, and as Misael said, we've worked really quickly on this project to move this forward, but we also want sound data that we can use to make good decisions. And I'll give a little bit more detail here as we go on. So you've heard some talk about this, so I'll just be real quick on it. We all know now that EPA recently issued new health advisory levels. Again, PFAS, perfluoroalkyl substances, that's really referring to a whole range of contaminants. It's not just a single chemical, it's a group of chemicals. They've been used widely for a number of reasons. And so EPA has set health advisories for these 4 compounds. You also heard that a health advisory is not a regulatory standard. It provides technical information that we can use to help inform our decisions. So up to about a month ago, we were at 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS, the 2 kind of most common PFAS that we hear of. Those new interim updated HALs are posted here, quite a bit smaller, and like has been mentioned, lower than our detection limit. So really, our detection limit's around 2 parts per trillion. If we're detecting it, then we know we've exceeded a health advisory limit. There are also 2 other final health advisories for PFBS and Gen X chemicals. You'll see as we go on, these are a little bit less relevant to our investigation here, and they're set up relatively higher than the other 2. Okay, so ADQ has taken a number of actions since that planning began back in the summer of 2020. One of our top agency priorities is to accelerate cleanups, and this site it's no exception. We've been using a dynamic work strategy here to move quickly and efficiently, and really that just means we try to plan for flexibility, try to plan to be able to quickly adapt our approach as we gather new information. And so right away, ADQ committed more than $3 million in funding from our limited water quality assurance revolving fund, and that allowed us to take a number of actions. In about the first year, we installed 7 monitoring wells, but these weren't simply just holes in the ground. We drilled these as deep as 600 feet, and we meticulously collected soil samples, groundwater samples at regular intervals. So we recorded detailed observations of the geology, and all this allowed us to find the best locations for constructing the wells, and really just all of this to make sure that when we were done, we'd have some confidence that we'd adequately characterized the aquifer here. This allowed us to define the extent of PFAS impacts in groundwater here in this area, and helped us to provide input to a 3-dimensional model of groundwater flow. And that model has helped us to evaluate remediation strategies for the area, again, getting to that point where we can take action. During the project, we've also worked closely with the Air Force, which you've heard a little bit about now. We were able to sign the Environmental Services Agreement, which helped us with the construction of a demonstration treatment system, and I'll talk more about that here in just a minute. We also recently signed, as you heard, a new agreement to help us fund the operation and maintenance of that system, and we're very appreciative of the Air Force's assistance in getting this treatment system up and running so quickly. Very recently, we installed an 8th monitoring well. Some of you may have seen our drill rig there north of the golf course along Broadway. And that really was placed in a critical area that's going to provide us a little bit more detail in an important spot for us in the plume. And it's going to give us some information and help us in looking at our full-scale remedy. So we've got a lot of wells in the area now. We're closely monitoring them, and the data is continually helping us to improve our groundwater model and look at our options for further action. Okay. So here we have some results. As I mentioned a few times now, we're now up to 8 monitoring wells that ADQ has installed in the area, in addition to a number of the already existing wells, giving us a monitoring network to really look at what's going on here. So these maps have changed a little bit. If you've seen previous presentations, we've tweaked these now based on the new health advisory levels. So what you're seeing here is just a single compound, PFOA, and you're seeing essentially any detections of PFOA. So a lot of detail on this map. I know that's really there if we need to zoom in and look at something based on a question maybe, but I think the main thing to get out of here, looking at the red dots, the numbers represent concentrations. The red dots represent anywhere where PFOA has been detected at all. And then the gray dots show where we have not detected PFOA. I think what you can see here is groundwater is moving. So groundwater is moving from south to north. So you can see the edge of the plume is right along Broadway, kind of in the Broadway-Alvernon area. And that's about 2 miles from the base boundary. We do have some detections a little bit to the west. And again, that's something a little bit different than the figures we've shown before. But those detections have always been there. Now with the new health advisory, we are just, we're highlighting them here a little bit more. I'd like to just take a moment here to acknowledge the partnership with City of Tucson because what you're seeing here looks like just dots on a map, but there was a lot of close coordination that went on to get our wells installed, to be able to sample and get results from the City of Tucson wells,
Ready to
Tucson
go?
water
Yeah.
wells that
Where's the
exist in
flyers?
this area. And it's really been a really good partnership. The City of Tucson's been invaluable to helping us make progress on this site. So just want to say thank you there. Now this is a picture of PFOS, the other contaminant there with the health advisory that's essentially at the detection limit. You can see this looks a little bit different. I think that this kind of highlights the fact that PFAS is made up of different chemicals. It's not just a singular chemical that we're looking at, a singular plume. These chemicals have different properties. They might behave differently in the environment, may have different release histories. And so all of this can result in different extents of contamination. So again, this is PFOS. And PFOA, and I think it was mentioned Tucson Water has some additional operating targets, internal operating targets beyond these. But these two compounds, and really at the detection limit, they really encompass the extent of the issue here. Okay, and this is a little bit more of a simplified, kind of easier to digest figure. This is what we call a conceptual site model. This is a bit of a simplified view of that. I think Shimi mentioned their conceptual site model as well. These are really important tools for us to determine what's going on and try and make decisions. Basically what we have here now is we're looking at a slice of the earth. So if you took a line and if you drew a line from basically Elcon Mall down to the base boundary and you split it open like a watermelon and looked at the inside, this is what you'd be looking at here. So we've got north now is to the left and south and the Air Force Base to the right. So you can see here we've kind of just put the general picture together of what we've seen. We have the public supply wells which have been impacted already. And you can see that there. And then the yellow dashed line kind of shows the extent of our contamination. And what's being shown here also is the three-dimensional extent of contamination, because it's not just the spread on a 2D map. But when we did our investigation, we really wanted to make sure that we looked at the depth as well, and we had the full 3 dimensions characterized. And so the extent of impacts extends about 2 miles from the base. And of course, down gradient, we have additional public supply wells and even private supply wells. And again, the objective of this project is to protect those wells and prevent any further impacts. As I go on here, I'm going to talk about some of the actions that we took. And so one of the things we were seeing as this conceptual site model started to come together was an opportunity for action. And so on this public supply well, you can kind of see it here over to the right, the one that says remove from service. We identified that we could go to that well existed already. We could start extracting from there and treating, and we could start to make a positive impact on PFAS concentrations. And then in addition to that, we could also use that data to start looking at a full-scale remedy. So we looked at that. We call that our demonstration remedy, to be able to demonstrate that, hey, look, we can do this. We can make a positive impact, and we can demonstrate that the technology works, and be able to then design an efficient full-scale remedy. And the full-scale remedy would be the one that would go in on this screen further to the left at the end of that plume to make sure that nothing is moving beyond. So you can just kind of keep that in mind as I run through real quickly here the actions we've taken with regard, especially to the demonstration remedy. Okay, so the demonstration remedy, as I just described, pretty early on, we began focusing on designing this remedy. And we began construction last summer. We worked really hard to overcome a lot of pandemic and supply chain induced delays. And we got that system up and running and completed in December 2021. That system uses a formerly inactive Tucson water well, C007, and it's really located in a great spot. It's in one of the highest areas of contamination that we have. And so it's already making an impact. We had a ribbon cutting ceremony on January 12th of this year. Had a nice turnout. The mayor was there, some representatives of the city of Tucson, and some community members as well in attendance. We were very appreciative to Tucson Water for helping us put that on. So the system works by using ion exchange resin. So water is extracted and it moves through 2 ion exchange vessels in series, and that ensures a redundant remedy. What that means is the water is going into the first vessel you see here. These are about 15 to 20 foot high vessels. They're filled with ion exchange media, and essentially what that is a sticky media. The water comes in, the PFAS stick to it, and clean water comes out the other end. What's happening is water's coming in that first vessel, it's leaving the first vessel, and then entering the second vessel, then leaving the second vessel and being discharged. The first vessel is sufficient to fully clean the PFAS out of the water. So we have clean water moving into the second vessel, and that's done again to give us redundancy, to make sure we can only sample so frequently. If we ever had PFAS coming through the first vessel, it would be taken care of by the second vessel, and then we could change out the media in the first one. Everything's been working really well. We have more than 35 million gallons of groundwater that have been treated to date. As I said, the demonstration remedy is already having a positive impact. We are removing PFAS from the highest concentration area of the plume. We're limiting movement now of PFAS towards central Tucson. And then, as I said, we're looking toward that full-scale remedy that's really going to prevent anything else from impacting additional wells. And so this is being used to evaluate the efficiency of ion exchange and really give us the data we need to design an efficient system there. It's also providing a platform for evaluating other treatment technologies. So science of PFAS remediation, it's very active right now, and we're working with several entities to look at doing some research on some of the new technologies, and hopefully the system can have some impact even beyond Tucson. All right, and then as I said, we've got clean treated water being discharged from the system. That water is actually entering a storm sewer. You can see on the map here that the star here on the map is our system. That's about 32nd and Columbus. Where the water's moving underground in the storm sewer for quite a ways until it gets past Alvernon Way. And then it daylights into Citation Wash. That's just west of Alvernon. We sent out an informational flyer to the community there, about 600 residents in the area back in February, just to alert them what was going on, give them some contact information in case there were any issues. Tucson Water's been kind enough to help us post some additional purple signs in the area. Just reminding folks not to play and drink in the water, or play in the water, drink the water. That's not from anything that our system is discharging, but of course, if things are going into a wash and the animals, the ducks are using the wash, it's not a great idea to be ingesting that water. So we've got some signs up there. We're conducting regular wash inspections. Maintenance activities are occurring, so the city's helping us out to maintain that wash. And if anybody lives in the area, you may have noticed the system's been off for a little while. The city is actually right now helping us to maintain that wash prior to hopefully the real monsoon rains kicking in. And so hopefully our system will be back on and running really any day now. In addition to that, we're still evaluating our options for discharge. So, there are positives and negatives to everything. Some of this wash maintenance that we have to go through can be a little bit of an issue from us. So to try and have this system up and running and doing its positive work as much as possible, we are continuing to look at all of our options. Okay. And then, so now I've talked quite a bit here about the demonstration remedy. Now that that is up and running, fully operational, and really even before it was, we've been already focusing on that full-scale remediation effort. And so we've been making quite a bit of progress to date on moving as quickly as we can there. We've completed extensive water level monitoring, water quality monitoring this past year. We've got a lot of data from this area, and that's going to really help us evaluate what's going on and be able to design an efficient remedy. All that data is going into our three-dimensional groundwater model. It's helping us do things like conduct capture analysis and figure out what kind of a remedy is really needed in this area. As I said, we installed that additional well. Not only is that going to help us characterize the plume in this area and really keep an eye on it and monitor what's happening, but it also can be, it was sort of dual purpose. It can be incorporated into the final remedy as an observation well. And then, as I've mentioned several times, we're getting really valuable data out of our demonstration remedy that's going to feed right into full scale. So we're continuing to move ahead. We are continuing to make progress on this site. And yeah, that's really all I have. If you have any questions, my contact information is here. We also have the contact information for our Chief Science Officer, Paula Panzino. So please feel free to reach out. We also have some website here, some web pages on our ADDEQ website you can visit. So I appreciate your time. Again, sorry for the glitch in the beginning. Hope I didn't move too fast there. And I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. And then Chris Avery from the City Attorney's Office, quick update on the 3M litigation and whatever else you prepared.
Hello, everyone. Trying to get my video to go on. Here we go. I'd like to talk first about an update to the 3M litigation, and then Councilmember Kozachick has also asked me to speak briefly about the health advisory levels and MCLs and the legal effect of those designations. As many of you know, the City of Tucson is a plaintiff in litigation filed against manufacturers of aqueous film forming foams, including 3M, which is the sole producer of PFAS, which is a common constituent in all the regulations and the remediation efforts that we've been discussing this evening. At the present, the case is in the middle of dispository motions. It's a legal way of saying if 3M wins, then they may be removed from the litigation and the United States government substitute in its place, based on the idea that 3M produced a product at the request of the United States government, and the United States government was aware of the risks of using the product. As plaintiffs, we've filed motions claiming that 3M did not, with plenty of substantial evidence to back up the assertions, that 3M did not fully disclose the health risks of its products to the government at the time it developed the specifications for aqueous film forming, and that 3M should be left in the litigation. Either way, the litigation will proceed against a defendant. That defendant could be the manufacturer, or the defendant could be the United States government, but the litigation will proceed apace. And we expect oral arguments in that matter to be reset. They had been set for earlier this spring, but were shut down due to some COVID exposures in the Federal District Court in South Carolina. So we will keep you updated on that. In addition, I wanted to give a brief presentation or a brief discussion about the difference between health advisory levels and other EPA regulations. There's already been some discussions about what health advisory levels are out there and what action EPA took on June 15th to set them. I think it's important to understand that although health advisory levels are not regulatory requirements in the sense that there are legal consequences for a water provider who delivers water that exceeds a health advisory level, health advisory levels are important for water providers in setting their own responses to contaminated aquifers. And in addition, the health advisory levels are part of a more widespread effort, the part of the EPA to more intensely regulate perfluorinated compounds. And there's a couple other concurrent actions that are going on that are equally as important as setting the health advisory level from a legal point of view. One is that the EPA has added 4 or 5 perfluorinated compounds to their contaminated site cleanup tables, which basically means for the TARP project now, perfluorinated compounds are at least potentially part of EPA's determination in moving forward with cleanup of those particular levels. In addition, EPA is proceeding to list PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, and GenX as RCRA hazardous constituents. Again, this EPA regulation be more significant in terms of cleaning up the TARP remedy and also setting cleanup targets for any other site that may have these hazardous constituents. And finally, along with the promulgation of the health advisories in June, EPA indicated that they would be issuing a maximum contaminant level and maximum contaminant level goals for at least some subset of PFAS compounds in the fall of 22. So, in the next 4 months or so, with final MCLs to be promulgated in the fall of 23. Those MCLs, again, are a very serious regulation for a water provider, and they also help to set a wide variety of other regulations, including aquifer protection permits, Clean Water Act discharge permits, and other permits. So we anticipate a deal of action that will be coming along in November of 2022 as we get some kind of insight as to what the proposed levels will be, and then we'll be carefully watching for a year as EPA moves through with final promulgation of an MCL. So with that, I'll retreat back to the background and try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. That's really important information about the MCLs. So I'm going to try and go through these questions as quickly as we can. So up at the top, this is probably a John Kimmick question. Can you talk about the local plan for RO, reverse osmosis? And in The Guardian had an article last week that spoke about a different kind of test than what the EPA recommends. And can you speak a bit about that test compared to what the EPA's test was or does?
Okay, yeah, just really quickly, RO is just another treatment mechanism that can be used for highly contaminated water sources with perfluorinated compounds or other compounds. RO is very effective with that and removing it. The city has no plans right now to do any RO treatment because, like I mentioned earlier, in the process, we're using wells that are not impacted by PFAS at this time. So just really quickly on that one. And the second half of the question was the article in The Guardian last week. The Guardian used a non-EPA method called total organic fluorine, where they were trying to measure all PFAS compounds or fluorinated compounds together, assuming that everyone is equal, every compound is equal, and every compound is hazardous. That is not a regulated test. That is not something that has an EPA method, and it's not something that as a drinking water provider we do. So we're focusing on the EPA regulated methods that can be done and conducted in a laboratory setting with complete compliance and controls of understanding those numbers and what they are.
Okay. There's a question about commercially available home filters, and Leaf put a link to one suggestion in the chat. So I'm going to move on to probably a John thing again. I'm not aware of what the county, evidently the county did some testing recently with red or orange Santa Cruz water. Do you know what that was about?
No, I don't know what that's referring to.
Okay. Kirsten Engel is asking about measures the Air Force will be taking to prevent additional contamination from seeping into the groundwater, and more of an explanation on continuing to use 70 parts per trillion. And I was curious about that also. So you use the Air Force folks continue to say we're relying on 70 parts per trillion, while the EPA has dropped that health advisory down to 0.0004. Can you speak to what your plan is to address that and how that changes your approach?
Cash for the go and answer that question, or Shimmy?
Sir, this is Cindy Cash. I can answer that question. As I indicated at the top of the meeting, we are in a holding pattern right now, waiting for OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, to decide how they want to address that new lifetime health advisory. Until we hear something from them, I am not even going to try to guess at what they're going to decide or what it's going to mean. I apologize. I know you all would like to have an answer. I would also like to have an answer, but unfortunately, we are in a holding pattern right now, just waiting to hear something.
Also, to the Air Force, there were several efforts to reach out to people on wells who you could not contact. Do you plan to reinitiate that effort to contact them?
I can answer that one
Yes,
also. We initially made 3 attempts to reach every single property owner who we thought had a well. That included an initial letter, followed up by a certified letter, followed by knocking on their door and leaving an information package. If we did not hear from them, we moved on. That was the direction that was given to us by our legal counsel. We have discussed the possibility of going back and trying to reach out one more time to some of these people who are non-responsive, but no decision's been made yet as to whether we will do that or when we will do it.
Okay.
Also, in addition to what Cindy said, we also partnered with ADEQ when we sampled at Davis Mountain. So we had somebody from ADEQ come with us, hoping to reach to the homeowners. We also, like Cindy said, there was a couple of them where we left the information package and the homeowners called us a couple of weeks later, and we called them back and scheduled sampling of their wells.
Okay.
And they have the information with them. They could call us anytime if they change their mind.
There are several questions about the severity of the danger from PFAS and then the various chemicals. And maybe, Chris, this is one for you. I think this speaks to the whole notion of the lowering of the health advisory, stepping towards MCLs. I can tell you that one of the reasons, and Chris can expand on this, I'll just be real brief. One of the reasons the city engaged in litigation against 3M and some other product manufacturers is because they were involved in litigation in the state of Minnesota several years ago, and they settled for a significant amount of money. And during the course of discovery in that, there were documents that 3M was in possession of from their own studies back in the 70s, the same time that Rachel Carson was writing her books about various pollutants, that indicated that they knew back in the 70s that these were toxins. And that's one of the reasons that they're implicated in this litigation. But Chris, is there more that you would want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that the an MCL incorporates both a health assessment as well as a cost of compliance into its reasoning. So obviously the health advisory levels are set at really, really low levels. But an MCL will be essentially EPA's judgment about whether where a reasonable amount of remediation can occur and what the water providers are capable of doing. And so like some of the other commenters here, I think the health advisory levels probably foreshadow a fairly low MCL, but until the initial proposed MCL is promulgated in a few months, we won't know exactly what that means. And there is still some opportunity for EPA to revise the proposed MCL before the final MCL takes effect in the fall. So again, we're in a pattern where, at least over the next few months, it's worth considering that close the MCL down the fall, and once that happens, there will be a lot more light shed on this issue.
Okay. And I can say that when the city of Tucson was made aware that the EPA had dropped the maximum contamination level for 1,4-dioxane, we went out and built a treatment plant while we were still fighting with the military about who would pay for it. So we're going to be proactive on this. Stephanie asked a really good question that is a burr under my saddle also, and I think this is for the DoD folks to explain perhaps the CERCLA process. And she asked that when we recognize that there's a contamination, at what point do we skip the evaluation process and go immediately to remediation?
So I can address that also. This is Cindy Cash with the PFAS team. The CERCLA process is a very formal process. It starts with a preliminary assessment, which is the records review. It then goes to what we call a site inspection, where we do some limited sampling, basically looking to see if there's presence or absence of those contaminants at the site that exceeds the EPA regional screening levels. Please note earlier that I said that those regional screening levels have recently been lowered by EPA, and we are now addressing those new lower screening levels. We're working towards those now. After that, if we are exceeding the regional screening levels, we go into a full remedial investigation that delineates the full nature and extent of the contamination above the screening levels. After it's been fully delineated, we prepare what we call a feasibility study that looks at various options to remediate the site. We select an option that is documented in a record of decision that is approved by the regulatory authorities. And then we get into the remedial design and implementation and operation of that remedy. Now, what we do recognize under CERCLA is that at any time during that process, if we identify that there is unacceptable risk, and I'm using these in quotations because that is a direct quote from CERCLA, we can deviate from that process and implement some type of a removal action or an interim remedy at any time. And we are actively doing that at multiple installations across the country. And in fact, we are doing that right now at Davis-Monthan. We're doing a non-time critical removal action, also known as an NTICRA, to deal with the groundwater that's leaving the installation that is above the lifetime health advisory of 70. Over.
Cindy, is it possible that when the EPA sets an MCL at point whatever they've set it at, that will be the catalyst for you to be jumping, taking those immediate remedial actions?
No, we could take those actions at any time. We don't have to wait for an MCL.
Okay. We love it.
Yeah, and like I said, we are. With the additional, especially with the additional funding that Congress has provided to us over the last several years, we're taking advantage of that money and using it to do these out of sight, what we call out of normal cycle, CERCLA cycle process, where we can address this unacceptable risk sooner rather than later.
Okay, I think you can see from the attendance in this meeting that there's quite a significant interest in seeing you do that here in Tucson. Beth asks the source of PFAS and dioxin. So dioxin was a chemical used in manufacturing. It was a solvent that used. Hughes Aircraft was one of the purveyors of it. PFAS is the primary source of PFAS is AFFF. It's aqueous film forming foam. It's a firefighting foam that has been used by the military. I would suggest that probably every major city in the country that has a military base also has a PFAS problem as a result of that. PFAS, though, is also used on any non-stick surface, such as the non-stick surface in your pizza boxes and the non-stick surfaces that you wear in Gore-Tex and that kind of thing. So there's sort of an underlying level of PFAS, regardless of the extreme levels that we're seeing as a result of the AFFF. Kristen asks a great question about the trajectory of the plume. This, I believe you're talking about DM, what's happened in the past 5 or 10 years, not just since 2019. So what do we see, and maybe John, this is you, what have we seen happening with the plume? And I'd say plumes because there's the one out by AOP as well, out by TIA.
Yeah, the one northwest of Davis Mountain, I think is fairly flat, and Matt and Paula might know because there's not a lot of pumping because we've turned off so many wells from the central well field. I think there's not a lot of movement happening, but the plume is still in that general area and will eventually need to be removed. Going over to TARP though, because we operate the TARP treatment plant to treat for TCE and the 1,4-dioxane, along with the other treatment plants that are in the area, there's significant movement occurring. And that's one of our concerns that we have, is that there's PFAS continuing to rise in the TARP recovery field for that treatment process there. But the water coming from the TARP plant does not go to the that's treated at the TARP facility, does not go to the drinking water supply anymore. That was stopped a year ago.
And these next two are also for you. Does groundwater mix with CAP water at any point in the watershed? And then continue and speak to the capacity of Tucson's groundwater. Are we running out of Colorado River water? Yes. And the groundwater that we have. So that's the whole point that I made at the beginning, is when the Bureau of Reclamation announced that the 7 basin states need to come up with 2 to 4 million acre feet reductions, and they're looking for a solution to that by August. That means that we are going to necessarily be reliant on our groundwater sooner rather than later. And so, can you speak to the whether or not groundwater mixes with CAP, and sort of your assessment of where we are with that whole Bureau of Reclamation charge to us and the other basin states?
Yeah, sure. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, where historically the CAP water comes into the Tucson community, it comes into Avra Valley. So it's in the aquifer that's separate from the Tucson aquifer west of the city. When you're at the Desert Museum, there's an overlook and you might see large pools of water out in the desert. That's where we take our Colorado River water and let it sink into the aquifer in Avra Valley. So the good news is there's no known contamination of PFAS in the aquifer west of the city of Tucson, where the majority of our water supply comes from. And the council member is right. There probably will be restrictions or less Colorado River water available to the city of Tucson in the future because of the cuts, because of the shortage on the river. We currently get an allocation of 144,191 acre feet a year, which we've been taking consistently for the last several years. We expect that to be cut to probably something a little less than 100,000 acre feet a year. But our community demand is only about 100,000 acre feet a year. So what we've been doing proactively is banking excess Colorado River water west of the city for these times of shortage and times of drought. So we're in a good position by having access to the aquifer in Avra Valley as our main supply, and thankfully, knock on wood, a clean supply for the community of Tucson. But we will eventually have to come back to the central Tucson basin, and that's why it's so important that these contaminated sites are cleaned up sooner rather than later.
Right. And John, maybe also for you, and I don't know how you would answer, is PFAS not the only contaminant in our groundwater? Do you know what percentage of contamination it contributes?
No, it's minor compared to how many square miles of the Tucson basin actually is. So, you know, it's present out there. It's a forever chemical. The sooner we remove it, the better, because we don't want it to spread any further. But it's not the majority of the aquifer. There's still clean areas of the Tucson aquifer that we can withdraw water from.
Yeah, and yet the fact that of its proximity just southeast of the central well field is significant. The rest of that question is related to the health problems, and there are a few questions about health problems. Again, that was identified during the Minnesota litigation with 3M and some other product manufacturers. It formed the basis for their settlement, and it's the reason we're in litigation also with those product manufacturers. This is probably I think a sneak question, because you've kind of touched on it, the role of Congress in accelerating the federal government's response. We have several different pieces of legislation right now that are pending signing that have so significant amounts of cash associated with them. But Cindy, can you speak more to that?
Yeah, if I can show my screen, I have a chart I'd like to show. Let me figure out how to do that.
While you're doing it, I'm going to ask Matt to speak to this. You mentioned, Matt, during your presentation about some of the treatment modalities, but you also mentioned some other technologies associated with the demonstration program. Can you talk about perhaps what the costs, who's going to pay for those, the time frame for installation?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so maybe it was a little bit unclear. So we're focusing right now on evaluating ion exchange media. We're comparing that against other known technologies like carbon treatment to see what's going to be most efficient. There are these emerging treatment technologies that we may be able to help out with. In some cases, providing water for laboratory experiments. In some cases, providing some small throughput. So these are really emerging right now, and we don't have the answers to those. So some of the help that we might be able to provide is to get to those kind of those answers. How much is it going to cost? Is this really practical? Those things. So these would be much smaller scale. The whole time the ion exchange would be running. So it's not like we're going to switch technologies. It's just we're going to be able to kind of use part of the system to look at some of these things.
Okay. Nationwide, it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. Cindy, we've got your screen up.
Okay, so as you can see, this is our total Air Force cleanup program funding. So this includes active, reserve, and for the last several years, as you can see, starting in FY18, we received a $59 million plus up from Congress to help us start dealing with the PFOA, PFAS impacts at our installations. And then every year since then, it's been going up. So the amount that we received this year, FY22, was an additional $289 million over what we already received, which was a little bit over $400 million. So the total that we have to spend this year on our entire program, and that includes both PFAS and non-PFAS. So we still are trying to clean up all of our other, what we call legacy contaminants, the TCEs, the PCEs, the metals, things like that are still hanging out there at some of our installations. So the total for this year has been $565 million, with a good chunk of that going to PFAS. One other slide I'd like to show. This shows how we have accelerated our remedial investigation program under the active reserve program. And it's been very similar for BRAC and ANG. So originally we anticipated and programmed executing 10 remedial investigations every other year, taking us out to FY39. Because of the additional money that Congress has been giving us, we have accelerated that, and we anticipate that the last of the RIs will very likely be executed. So that bottom chart is probably a little out of date, but I have not had a chance to update it this year. We are actually on track to execute 30 RIs this year, which will leave us less than 10 for next year or the following year. So we anticipate by FY24, almost every single active and reserve installation that needs a remedial investigation will have that RI in place and being executed. So that's the benefit of getting a lot of the extra money that we have received from Congress.
With the conversation that's happening surrounding Interior Bureau of Reclamation, the Colorado River, will bases in locations such as Tucson that are going to be solely reliant on groundwater be given priority in those funding allocations?
So what we do every year, we use a DoD process called relative risk evaluation. So we identify about a half a dozen, 6, 7, 8 different risk criteria. And we screen and we assign a risk value to every single installation for each of these risk criteria. We then rack and stack them and prioritize. I can tell you that those installations with a off-base groundwater component tend to screen much higher in the prioritization level than those without. So installations like Davis-Monthan and Air Force Plant 44 tend to be higher on our prioritization list. But keep in mind that we are prioritizing almost 90 installations across the country at the same time to try to make sure that our money is placed in the areas where we do have our highest risk right now, not just to the base, but to our surrounding communities.
Okay. Maybe a Chris Avery question with respect to the water litigation. Has our approach to that included medical monitoring and health evaluations of people who drink the water?
To date, we haven't gotten that detailed in the litigation. We are seeking damages as the water provider for the costs that we've incurred to try to gain and mitigate PFAS contamination in order to keep the TARP remedy running. And we haven't gotten it yet into the exact damages on behalf of individual folks, or of a comprehensive approach to the damages the city of Tucson.
And how many jurisdictions, 70 something, are involved in our litigation?
I think it's probably more than that now. I think we have a combination of several hundred lawsuits that have been aggregated.
Okay. John, I think you mentioned this earlier. Tress is asking about the whether speak to our. He calls it assured water supply. I think you mean the what we've got stored that we can rely on once the Colorado River drops its last drop.
Yeah, we have ample amounts of legal access to groundwater. We have excess amounts of Colorado River water that we've stored in the past. The city still maintains a large percentage of effluent ownership from the regional wastewater treatment plants. So we have ample supplies that we can draw from. One of the things I've mentioned Avra Valley several times, and this goes to the forethinking of the mayor and council back in the early 1970s. Avra Valley used to have a lot of agriculture going on throughout the whole valley, and what our councils of 50 years ago recognized that was a clean and pristine valley. So the city of Tucson in the early 1970s actually bought 22,000 acres of farmland in Avra Valley, retired that land, and acquired all the groundwater rights associated with that land. So we have a lot of legal access to water across both valleys.
I think this is maybe another, Cindy, and you just sort of spoke to the accelerated schedule, but assuming that the EPA standard is going to be lowered, might that also accelerate the remediation actions and the funding?
Very unlikely. We are accelerating based on funding availability. As much money as we are provided over and above our normal, what we call TOA, our normal programmed funding, as much of that as possible, we are trying to push onto addressing PFAS issues at various installations. We right now have about 12 additional installations lined out that we're starting to look at right now for potentially doing some type of an out of surplus cycle remedial process in 23 and 24. So, excuse me, we are definitely in the planning ahead situation, hoping that we will get more money from Congress, at least for the next couple of years, so that we can really actively get a kickstart on implementing those remedies at a lot of our installations where we have groundwater migrating off-site.
Okay, Kirsten, you can fix that next year. Cindy, one more thing, just to clarify, remedial investigation is not the installation of a treatment plant. That's the end of the investigation process. Can you speak, or somebody from, maybe it's a math thing, can you speak to once the RI is done, what's the time frame before there's an actual remedy in place?
Well, I can speak to that from the Air Force perspective, with the understanding that, you know, we are a government entity and sometimes it takes us a little bit longer because our regulations require us to jump through probably a few more hoops than non-Air Force entities or non-DoD entities probably would. Once we complete the remedial investigation, it typically takes about 1 to 2 years to finish the feasibility study. And then I'd say probably another 1 year or so to complete the record of decision. That's assuming that these are not overly complex sites and that the Air Force and our regulatory partners are typically in general agreement on how we want to move forward. What we're finding, however, is that because PFAS is such a new chemical and it's still very unknown, and a lot of the standards that we would typically follow really haven't been set yet. We're finding that there's been an awful lot of discussion between the Air Force and our regulatory partners on just the work plans for our remedial investigations before we can actually start the field sampling. It's not a bad thing. It's just that there's a lot more discussion because we want to all make sure that we're doing the right thing.
And yet, Matt, ADEQ is moving forward with the installation of plants that are actually treating and remediating.
Yeah, that's correct. We have our demonstration system in place, remediating groundwater, making an impact, and we are continuing down the road toward that full-scale remedy as quickly as possible.
Wonderful. This is Charles has a good. John, this is for you again. What levels of PFAS are present in the recently recharged water that's being put into the Santa Cruz?
If we're talking from the TARP facility at the Irvington outfall, it should be 0 because that's going through a treatment process. The water that's going in at the Heritage Project, though, is from our reclaimed water system. So the reclaimed water system, the non-potable system that serves the community, does have background levels of several perfluorinated compounds. So somewhere in the 20 to 50 range, generally, per trillion.
Okay. That is the last question, and we are nearly a half an hour over, and so I want to kind of go off script a little bit. And Stuart, are you still on the call? If so, I'd like to give you an opportunity to say a couple of closing remarks. But first, I want to thank all the participants from the DoD, ADEQ, Sun Water, and Chris Avery for hanging out and presenting such a comprehensive presentation on this. It's a complex topic.